I would like to share my story because right now I feel confused, lost, broken, and I do not know what to do from this point on. I must warn you that it is a long one. I am 33 years old and she is also 33. We got married in 2010. We met at my uncle's church. I was playing the piano and noticed her staring at me, which made me laugh. At that time I was already seeing someone, so I did not approach her. But when that relationship ended, I found a way to contact her through an early social media platform. We went to the movies as friends, and after 3 weeks I asked her if she wanted to be my girlfriend. She said yes. Life was wonderful. We went out all the time. I sang and played piano for her, just like in the movies. Things were exactly the way I had always hoped they could be. Then one night, the evening before her birthday, I called and asked if she wanted to go to the movies on her special day. She said no. She had plans with her friends and was being picked up at 8 in the evening. Because we had only been together a few months, I told myself I did not want her to feel controlled, so I let it go. 2 days later, I found pictures on her profile from that night. There were photographs of her at a gathering with her friends, and in some of them her former partner, I will call him her ex, was involved in things I was not comfortable seeing. She had even commented on one of the photographs in a way that troubled me. I called her immediately and asked her to explain what had happened. We broke up that night. But then she called back, told me she was deeply sorry, said it was stupid of her, and that she would never do anything like that again. I believed her, and we got back together. Fast forward 2 years. I proposed to her at a very special place, a spot up in the hills with a breathtaking view of the Bay Area. We called it Top of the World. It was the place where I asked her to be my wife, and she said yes. We got married on my grandparents' property in a beautiful outdoor ceremony. The first 2 years of our marriage were the best of my life. We were going through new adventures together constantly. I genuinely believed we were perfect for each other, even though we were complete opposites in many ways. I am an outdoors person, camping, swimming, mountain biking. She was more of a city person who loved shopping, but we always found ways to make it work. Then, after about 2 years of being married, I was on our desktop computer and noticed that she had left her social media account open. What I saw, completely by accident, were messages between her and her ex. He told her he missed her. She replied that she missed him too. I saved those messages immediately, sensing I might need them later. I confronted her and asked her to explain herself. She had no real answer. She just said they had only been talking and that it was a mistake. I was furious, but I let it go and told her I did not want her speaking to him anymore. Some time passed. Then I ran into an old friend from high school. During our conversation, he mentioned that he did a kind of informal personal investigation work on the side, accessing devices and online accounts to gather information. I took down his number, just in case it might ever be useful. A few months after that, I started noticing that she was constantly hiding her phone. That felt like a significant warning sign to me. I tried using the password she had always used before, but it no longer worked. She had changed it. She had no explanation. That night I could not sleep. My instincts were telling me something was wrong. I reached out to my old friend from high school and gave him all the information I could. He said to give him some time. The next morning he called and asked to meet in person. When we sat down together, he handed me the first page of what he had gathered. He said, "Good luck." And just the way he said it made my stomach drop. The records went all the way back to when we were still dating. Reading the first page, I saw her discussing which bus to take and what time to leave to meet her ex. I wanted to cry, but I held myself together. The more I kept reading, the worse it became. What I found was clear evidence that they had been intimate with each other multiple times a week for approximately 6 months, while she was with me. She was texting me in those very same hours telling me her day had been boring and uneventful. After 15 pages or more of this, I reached the point where she told him she could no longer continue because she had developed real feelings for me. And with that, it had stopped. After finishing all of it, I came home. She looked up with a smile and said she had missed me. I looked at her and could not believe what I was seeing. From that point on, I was never able to look at her the same way again. I began pulling away. I could not sleep or eat properly. I wanted to end things right then, but I kept telling myself that no one is perfect, and I could not just walk away from the promises we had made to each other. Years passed. I never fully forgave it, and I was never truly able to forget it. Then, family-related trouble entered my life. I was falsely accused of something serious. The authorities became involved. Everything was eventually dropped because the account of events made no sense and was inconsistent with everything known about me. But the damage was done. My wife's family turned against me completely. I was effectively pushed out of their circle. I had to find my own place to stay while things settled. I assumed my wife would stand by me. She did not. She did not come with me. That broke something in me that had not fully healed from before. We had both promised to be there for each other, no matter what. I kept my side of that promise. She did not keep hers. I stayed temporarily at my employer's house while I worked out my next steps, but I kept in regular contact with my wife throughout. Gradually, I noticed she was calling me less often. That same familiar feeling returned, the one I had learned not to ignore. I called her and asked if she wanted to come see some holiday lights together in the city. She agreed. We had a genuinely decent evening. I told myself I was probably imagining things again. It got late, and I suggested we get a hotel room nearby rather than drive back at that hour. She agreed. We spent the night together. But something felt wrong. I felt as though I was the only one truly present. The next morning I drove her home, and we ended up in an argument. That was when she told me she no longer loved me. Those words destroyed me. The woman of my life was gone. I asked her why. She said she was not sure, that too much had happened, and she thought it was better to end things now. I told her to please think it over. I got back to wherever I was staying that day, and sat in my car and cried for close to an hour and a half. I did not know where to turn. I had to understand what had changed. I reached out again to my old friend from high school and told him I needed everything from September through December of that year. He also gave me a tracking device I could place on a vehicle magnetically to monitor its location. I placed it on her car when I passed her workplace during my lunch break. For the first couple of days, nothing unusual came through. Then one evening I saw that her car was parked about a mile from our home at around 8 o'clock at night. That was strange enough to warrant driving over. When I got there, I saw her with her ex. They were holding hands and being affectionate with each other. I wanted to get out of the car, but I stopped myself. I needed to keep my composure and gather whatever evidence I could before proceeding with a divorce. A few days later, I followed them to another city, using a friend's vehicle so I would not be recognized. When they reached their destination, they walked together, her head on his shoulder. At one point, I had to stop walking for a moment because I simply could not keep watching. I gathered myself and continued. They went into a restaurant together. Watching her smile and laugh with him, the same way she had once smiled and laughed with me, was almost more than I could bear. On another occasion, I followed them to a dance class. The music and the way they moved together was deeply intimate, and I stood there watching them look at each other as though they were completely in love. I took some photographs and video footage so that I would have documentation of what I had seen. Every day I still sent her messages. Most of the time she did not reply. I told her I missed her, that I wanted her back, that I loved her. One evening she replied saying she missed me too, but that things were no longer the same between us. The next day, my old friend contacted me and asked to meet in person. He said he did not have good news. When we sat down together, he handed me a large envelope containing 64 pages of printed messages, conversations between her and her ex, and also between her and her closest friend. I took the envelope back to where I was staying. It took me a long time to open it. I already knew what was inside was going to completely break me, but I opened it anyway. Reading through, I found message after message in which she and her ex spoke negatively about me, calling me worthless and saying she deserved someone better. He had reached out to her. At first she was hesitant, but eventually she agreed to meet him. She later told her close friend that when he kissed her, she had not pulled away, that the feelings came rushing back. Then she described a night where they had been together in his car and had fallen asleep, and when she woke up to him being close to her, instead of pulling away, she made a choice to stay. He suggested they get a hotel room nearby, and she agreed immediately. They went to a hotel about a mile from our home and spent the night together. Afterward, she told her friend that she had cried because she could not believe what she had done. She also told her friend that he and she had gone to our special place together, the spot in the hills, top of the world, the place where I had asked her to be my wife. When I read that, I stopped. I could not comprehend it. Of all the places in the world, they had gone there. After finishing everything, I sent her a message. I told her I knew I had lost her and that I was letting her go. I told her I was sorry for not being the husband she needed, sorry for whatever pain I had caused her, and that I wished her nothing but the best. That was the moment I accepted that I had truly lost everything. I called my father that night because I had no one else. I opened up to him completely and told him what had happened. His response was that I was probably not seeing things correctly and was trying to make her look bad to cover for something I had done. We got into a serious argument. I could not understand how he could respond that way when I was reaching out to him in one of the most painful moments of my life. He called her the same evening to ask her directly if she had been unfaithful. She told him there was no one else and that she had no idea why I would even suggest such a thing. I was alone with the truth, and no one believed me. I am the only girl among 7 children. The 7 of us are fiercely loyal and protective of one another, as many siblings are. But my older brother, I will call him Johnny, and I have always shared a bond that is different from the ones I have with my other brothers. I think this must be because we share the same biological father. He is an affable kind of person, generous, compassionate, a hands-on father, and a romantic partner who truly understands the value of fairly dividing the responsibilities that come with parenting and sharing a home as adults. When he got engaged 2 years ago to his then-girlfriend of 5 years, I will call her June, and she was already the mother of their first child together, I was genuinely thrilled for them. They married on the 30th of December in a small, rushed ceremony, primarily because they wanted to benefit from the higher standard tax deduction that came with being married. Everyone agreed it was a smart financial decision. They had been through a great deal together over the course of their 7-year relationship. They had both been struggling with drug use when they met, and they supported each other through the difficult process of getting sober and through the inevitable setbacks that came in the years that followed. After overcoming something that daunting, they had one child and then another, slowly saved money, bought decent vehicles, and found themselves in a beautiful older home with an incredible lease-to-own opportunity. They had one of those relationships that everyone talks about, but almost no one actually finds. The kind that counselors and films tell us exist, but that you rarely see up close in real life. Their life together seemed genuinely charmed, and we were all so happy for them. No one deserved it more. Needless to say, our family was not prepared for what was coming. First, let me give you a bit of backstory. June is not from our hometown. She is not even from our state. Because she did not know many people, my cousins and I welcomed her in as a friend. She actually became one of my closest friends, and I told her everything. Relationship struggles, health scares, all of it. My husband travels for work, but that is a story for a different time. June and I talked every single day. We took turns babysitting each other's children. We consulted each other before making wardrobe decisions. We were so close that we did not even knock when we came to visit. However, around October, she met a new group of friends through her daughter's preschool and began spending a great deal of time with these 3 women. I was genuinely happy for her. Everyone deserves friendships outside of their partner's family, and I knew she felt lonely on the nights when Johnny worked late. I could not always be there for her, and I understood that, but she started spending so much time with this new group that Johnny became concerned. Their children were rarely at home, and these adults were drinking and using cannabis around them on what was becoming a nearly daily basis. When he brought it up with June, she brushed him off and made no changes. Over time, spending time with the group gradually became spending time specifically with one particular woman. Every day, multiple times a day. June was on her phone constantly and would always hurriedly lock the screen the moment anyone came near. She was spending so much time with this one woman that the friend who had originally introduced June to the group actually became jealous and suspicious of the intensity of their friendship. I knew all of this because both June and Johnny were speaking to me about it separately. June told me she was simply excited to finally have her own circle of friends and that Johnny worked a lot, so what was the harm? I sympathized with her, but I did encourage her to stop the drinking and using cannabis around the children and perhaps not to see them every single weekend. She never took that advice. About a month ago, June finally confided in my cousin, I will call her Susie, that she was having an affair with one of her new girlfriends. She made Susie swear to secrecy before revealing what she was about to say. Susie, having made that promise before fully understanding what she was agreeing to keep quiet, did her best to talk June out of what she was doing. She reminded her of the wonderful life they had built together, of the two young children they shared, of the serious emotional damage that could result, and of the relationships June had with me and the rest of our family. June said she did not care. She was not willing to give this woman up because she was in love with her, and felt she should be able to have both. In her mind, an affair with a woman was somehow a lesser betrayal, and she even suggested that Johnny might not mind if he knew. She also added that she would not be telling him right now, because he would likely relapse if he found out, and she was aware that he had already confronted her with his suspicions. Ultimately, Susie was not able to keep the secret. It felt like too great a betrayal to stay silent about. She felt that Johnny deserved to know. She confided in me first, hoping that I could help prevent Johnny from potentially relapsing, and that I might be able to save both their marriage and my friendship with June. I chose to keep the information to myself for the time being, and to approach June directly. It took me 3 weeks to decide how best to handle it. I settled on encouraging her to end the affair as soon as possible, and allow some time for things to settle before telling Johnny. When I finally spoke with June, she said the exact same things she had said to Susie. She was not willing to give the other woman up, and she felt entirely justified in what she was doing. Then, the very next day, she told Johnny herself, only 45 minutes before he was due to report to an extremely dangerous job. He reacted exactly as I had feared. He did not go to work. He called in and spent the night relapsing. He never came home. The next morning, June launched what I can only describe as a calculated campaign to shape the narrative before anyone else could. She posted screenshots on social media showing Johnny asking around for prescription drugs and reaching out to other women. When I asked her to take the posts down, she responded by insulting me and accusing me of being responsible for the entire collapse of her life. She then went to our biological father's house, a man we do not often have contact with, who was largely absent from our lives, and told him a carefully constructed version of events that cast herself as the long-suffering victim of years of unfounded paranoia and accusations. She spent the night with our paternal aunt, who works in probation and parole, and told her the same story. She shared these distorted accounts, along with details of Johnny's relapse, with anyone who would listen. All the while, she conveniently never mentioned the affair she had been conducting on her husband of only 3 months. And she continued to insist that I was to blame for everything falling apart. After everything came undone, I began receiving calls and messages from people telling me about manipulation and dishonest behavior that had apparently been going on throughout the entire 7 years she had been in my brother's life. Everything I had ever confided in her, she had repeated to others. Not just to one person, to many people. Even the most deeply private things I had trusted her with had been shared. She had done the same to several of my cousins, and had quietly stirred conflict between me and my stepmother, a situation that ultimately contributed to my stepmother's decision to end her marriage to the man I know as my father. Learning of my brother's relapse and of June's betrayal of both of us simultaneously sent me into a state of panic that I have struggled to come back from. June was threatening to have Johnny arrested for drug use, and I was terrified. I believe this was her way of trying to secure temporary custody of the children, which would explain the smear campaign directed at estranged family members who had no prior context for any of this. But that was not the thing that frightened me most. When Johnny is in active addiction, we do not see him. He disappears for months at a time with no contact whatsoever. The longest he ever went was 16 months. For 16 months, I did not know if my brother was alive. I did not know if he had somewhere to sleep, when he had last eaten, whether he was being careful with what he was using, or whether he was able to take care of himself in the most basic ways. When I heard he had relapsed, it felt as though the accumulated weight of all those years of fear and grief descended on me at once. It felt like being struck hard in the stomach and being unable to breathe. I was sick multiple times and could not stop crying. That was the first time I truly understood what it feels like to hyperventilate. Ever since his relapse, and since discovering that June was never truly my friend, I have been deeply depressed. The worry for my brother's safety has consumed my days and nights. I cannot sleep. I am barely eating. I cannot organize my thoughts enough to accomplish anything meaningful in a day. Normally, anxiety drives me to clean and keep busy, but I cannot even collect myself enough to finish the dishes. I am completely overwhelmed by the fear of losing my brother to his addiction, and by the deep sense of betrayal and abandonment that comes with losing one of only 3 truly close friends I have ever had. I feel directionless. I cannot figure out how to begin processing any of this. My children keep asking about their cousins. They want to visit their favorite aunt. I keep making excuses because how do I begin to explain any of this to a 9-year-old? Through all of it, I keep swinging between deep sadness and a fierce anger towards someone I genuinely loved. I hate that I sometimes feel that way about her. I hate that anyone has the power to bring something that ugly out in me, and I hate that I feel so completely out of control because of it. Too long, didn't read. My sister-in-law of 3 months and best friend of 7 years cheated on my favorite brother. I also discovered she was never truly a friend to me at all. The anxiety this situation has caused is consuming my life. Hello. I'm going to post this anonymously, and I would like to keep the other people in this story anonymous as well. Some have passed on, but the ones still living deserve their privacy. As such, I am changing all names. Many years ago, I worked for a film studio. I was a spokesperson of sorts on one of their television programs a few times. I was never a celebrity or famous, and I stopped working there not long after the events of this story. It was a very brief period of time. But during that time, I met a young man my age who I began dating. He worked behind the scenes on the same program. I am going to call him James. I had been seeing James for a few months when we were invited to a party at the home of one of the men who had been with the company since its early days. Also attending that party was one of the founders of the company. I knew him because I had worked with him on the television program. I will call him Greg. Greg was in his 60s at the time, married, with grown children who had families of their own. I had not had much experience with alcohol, and at the party I drank too much too quickly and began to feel unwell. James was not ready to call it a night, so I told him I planned to go and lie down in one of the bedrooms for a little while, and to come and find me once he was ready to go home. Or once I had sobered up, whichever came first. I recall trying a few unfamiliar doors and eventually finding an available bedroom. The lights were off, and I was certainly not in the most coherent condition, but I felt around on the bed, and it seemed to still be made up, which was enough for me to assume it was unoccupied. I laid down on top of the covers, and apparently I fell asleep. I was awakened at some point afterward by someone behind me, an arm around my waist, making unwanted physical advances. I was still quite intoxicated, and had I been in a more alert state, I absolutely would have stopped what was happening immediately. But I was in such a disoriented condition that I did not react as I should have. I know that may be difficult to understand, but at first I was not even certain it was actually happening. I wondered if it was still part of a dream. I assumed it was James, and I whispered to him asking what he was doing. He did not respond. I did not fight or tell him to stop. As intoxicated as I was, any semblance of clear thinking had left me entirely. I was not afraid, but I did feel helpless. I am not offering this as an excuse. I intend it only as an accurate account of events from my own perspective. I accept responsibility for my lack of response at the time. I whispered James's name a few more times and was met with silence each time. Then I happened to look down at the arm holding me, and I knew immediately that was not James. It was the arm and hand of an older man, thin and wiry, with a gold ring on one finger. In my recollection, the entire encounter was over in seconds from that point. Noticing the unfamiliar arm was enough of a shock to drag me out of my disoriented state and out of the bed. The room was still quite dark, but my eyes had adjusted enough that I could make out the face of the man lying in the bed. It was Greg. He was curled on his side, very still, his arm still outstretched from where I had extracted myself. His eyes were closed, and I could hear his breathing. It made a faint whistling sound with each inhale. I panicked and left the room as quickly and quietly as I could. I went to the bathroom and cleaned up. I felt dizzy and deeply nauseated, but nothing would come up. I made my way back to find James still enjoying the party, completely unaware of what had just happened to me. I told him the first of many lies, that I had been sick in the bathroom and needed to go home. A friend who was also at the party offered to drive me. I still lived with my parents, and I was frightened as we pulled up to the house, afraid they would greet me or that they would be able to tell by my face that something had happened, or that they would ask questions and somehow cause me to confess. I slipped in through the side door and went straight to my room. It would have been pointless to tell anyone in any case. No one would have believed me. Greg was known to be a genuinely decent, moral man, the sort of person no one would ever have suspected of being unfaithful to his wife, let alone of something like this. And truly, that had been my own experience with him as well. In all the time I had worked with him, he had never said anything inappropriate in my presence, never made any kind of flirtatious remark, not even when we had been alone together. I had never once felt threatened by him. I had not run into Greg at the party before the incident, but a coworker who had spoken with him that evening was telling people that he had seemed very heavily intoxicated and had been slurring his words to the point that they could barely understand him. I believe that completely. I believe that he was not in his right mind that night and that he was not conscious of what he was doing or to whom he was doing it. I hold no ill will toward him whatsoever. James would try to persuade me to be intimate with him as young men tend to do, and I had always turned him down. But the week after the incident at the party, I gave in. I wanted that experience to be my real first time, a situation I was in control of and had had some say in. I wanted to forget that the other thing had happened at all. Not long after, I woke one morning wondering why the entire house seemed to smell of spoiled meat and wet dog, only to find that I was no longer able to tolerate the smell of my mother's homemade breakfast. My family insisted it smelled and tasted perfectly fine. I knew something was wrong. I was exhausted to the bone. When I tried to share a beer with James, it tasted like dirty water, and I had to spit it out. He bought me an ice cream instead, and I was so overwhelmed with gratitude that I cried, which was not like me at all. I told him I thought I might be pregnant. Once it was confirmed, we did as was expected in those days and got married. I left the studio once we were married. James stayed on. My son, I will call him Jack, was born about 5 months after the wedding. I had been telling myself throughout the pregnancy that Jack was definitely James's child. But I remember studying his small face closely when we were alone together in the hospital after he was born. I could not see either myself or James in his features. Since I could not clearly see Greg in them either, I convinced myself that he must have inherited the features of some distant relative, and I hoped he would resemble one of us more as he grew. Greg had been looking considerably worse for wear even before the night of the party and had clearly been struggling with some kind of health issue. A few days after Jack was born, Greg collapsed at work and was rushed to the hospital where he passed away. It came out shortly afterward that he had been battling cancer. I am certain this had something to do with what happened that night. In spite of what some may think upon reading this, Greg was not a bad person. I believe that either the cancer had affected his mind, or that he had been taking medication that interacted badly with the alcohol he had consumed that evening. I hold no ill will toward him. James and I both have light hair and light eyes. Jack was born with dark hair, but to my relief it turned blonde fairly quickly. His eyes remained blue for quite some time, then turned to a lovely aqua, and had eventually settled into a dark green and hazel color by his third birthday. It was around this time that I first began to occasionally notice that he would remind me of my former colleague, a certain angle of his face, an expression he would make, things like that. I was able to push the thought away most of the time. I simply refused to entertain it. I came across an old photograph of one of my husband's great-grandfathers, who had dark hair and eyes, and I convinced myself I had found the source of our son's unfamiliar features. I even showed the photograph to James, who agreed there was a resemblance, and that was that. Whenever anyone asked who Jack looked like, we would share that explanation. From the very beginning, Jack was different from other children, and this became more noticeable once his younger sister arrived 2 years later, and we had her to compare him to. He had never been an easy baby. He did not like to be held or cuddled. He would stiffen and push away from us. He would scream for hours on end, day after day. He rarely slept. He would cry himself into being sick after every feeding and continue screaming until the next one. He was clearly deeply unhappy, and nothing we tried could soothe him. It nearly drove James and me to complete exhaustion in that first year. Jack was a late walker, but by the time he was 1 year old, he could speak in complete sentences. By 18 months, he was drawing recognizable human figures with faces, hands, feet, hair, and ears. I was amazed. No one in our family had any kind of artistic ability whatsoever. He developed intense obsessions with different subjects, historical figures and events, mechanical things, modes of transportation, various species of animals. Whatever he was currently absorbed by, he would talk only about that, draw pictures of it, make up stories about it. We would buy him books on those subjects, and he would read them until he could recite every fact and figure from memory. One of his very first obsessions was something I knew Greg had also shared a lifelong passion for, and I remember being quietly anxious that James might make some kind of connection. He never did. You might expect that such an obviously bright child would do well in school, but Jack did terribly. He got into trouble on a daily basis for refusing to complete his work. He would sit and draw pictures all day, and when the teacher addressed it with him, he would appear to agree, wait until they stopped watching, and go right back to drawing. He did whatever he wanted to do, and that was that. He would read his textbooks cover to cover on the night they were distributed and was perfectly capable of passing tests. But he failed his classes because he simply would not turn in any work. James had great difficulty bonding with Jack, and they were usually at odds with one another. Jack left school and moved away from home at 16, largely, I believe, to escape James's temper. He went to live with my parents, who were still in another state at the time. We did not see him for a couple of years. Then one day, completely out of nowhere, he appeared on our doorstep. No phone call, no warning of any kind. He was simply there, which was entirely typical of Jack. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with the absolute image of a young Greg. There was no denying it any longer. Same face, same hair, same teeth, same ears, everything. He even fidgeted with his hands in the exact same way and held himself in the same positions. I had a very difficult time keeping my composure. I was deeply afraid that James would notice. But somehow, he never did. I kept the secret even after James passed away in 2020. I kept it until I had a minor stroke, and my doctors told me that I have an inoperable abdominal aortic aneurysm and 95% blockage in both of my carotid arteries. That was last year. I do not know whether either of those conditions will take me, or whether something else will come first. But I finally told Jack the truth. He took it as well as could be expected, and has told me he understands my reasons for keeping it to myself for all these years. I asked him to keep it a secret as well, and it was he who told me about this website, where one can share things like this anonymously. He had already done so himself and said it helped him to get it off his chest. I am giving it a try. I am aware that what I have done makes me someone who kept a very significant secret, and that some may see me as a terrible person for it. but the choices I made were the ones I believed were best at the time, for myself and for my children. I cannot go back and change anything now. I have no regrets. Thank you for the opportunity to share this. I hope that getting it off my chest will bring me some peace, and perhaps some young woman out there is in a similar situation and will feel less alone knowing this story exists. My ex-partner and I split up before our daughter, I will call her M, was 1 year old. The split was the fault of both of us. He was physically abusive, and I was self-medicating with prescription drugs. I went to rehabilitation right after we separated to start trying to build a new life as a single mother. My ex-partner and I worked out a visitation schedule outside of court and did the best we could to co-parent our daughter with minimal drama. I know he had hopes of reconciliation when I got clean, but I was unwilling to jump back into that toxic relationship. We each started seeing other people around my daughter's second birthday. I started getting calls from friends and family telling me they had received friend requests on social media from a woman I will call WS, someone none of them had ever met. They all went out of their way to tell me about these requests because the woman's profile was covered in pictures of her and my daughter. In the end, I found out that WS had sent friend requests to my preacher's wife, multiple friends, my late best friend's mother, the person I was dating at the time, and my recovery sponsor. It felt like I was being hunted. I finally worked up the nerve to look at WS's profile myself, and I saw that she had 2 children of her own, boys. But there were no recent pictures of them on her page. There were only pictures of her and my daughter. I was deeply unsettled and decided to ask my ex-partner to tell WS to stop contacting my friends and family. He told me I was overreacting out of jealousy and refused to address it. I made all of my social media accounts private. A year later, when my daughter was in preschool, my ex-partner asked me to give up one of my scheduled evenings with M so that they could both attend a family member's school performance together. I always tried to be flexible, and I agreed. On the night of the performance, I noticed a social media post showing that M's preschool was also hosting a performance that same evening. My instincts immediately told me something was wrong. I called my ex-partner and texted him multiple times with no response. I also called my parents to share my suspicions. I knew something was going on, so I got in my car and drove to M's preschool, where I found the parking lot full of cars at 7 in the evening. I walked into the cafeteria and immediately locked eyes with my ex-partner. He was sitting at a table with his parents, my daughter, and the woman who had been sending friend requests to everyone in my life, WS. I found out that my daughter's performance was already over, and that he had lied about where M would be that night so that he could bring his new girlfriend to the event. My ex-partner looked like a deer caught in headlights, and he immediately passed my daughter to his father, telling him to get her out of the cafeteria. His father practically ran out with my daughter in his arms, as though he needed to protect her from me. I told my ex-partner to come outside and talk, and we argued in the parking lot. After a short but heated exchange, my ex-partner fled the moment my father pulled into the lot. To this day, I do not think I have ever been as angry as I was in that moment. My ex-partner had a long history of lying to my parents to punish me and get them on his side whenever we had a conflict. True to form, he did exactly that after the preschool incident, going so far as to tell my parents that the school administration had to call the police on me for shouting at him in the cafeteria. Neither of those things ever happened. I arranged a meeting with the preschool the following day to explain to the administrators what had actually taken place. When my ex-partner found out about that meeting, he immediately pulled my daughter out of the school without telling me. A few months later, M told me that she was going to a new preschool in a different town. I immediately asked my ex-partner for the school calendar so that I could attend any events, but he said he had never been given one. He also refused to tell me the name or location of the school, which meant I was unable to pick M up during my scheduled time. After a month of him ignoring my requests, I got fed up and began looking into it myself. When I found the name of the school, I quickly discovered that WS worked there as a teaching assistant. Once again, my instincts told me he was up to something. In hopes of avoiding another confrontation, I asked my mother to go to the new school and get a copy of the calendar from the school office. My mother asked the front desk worker for a copy, but the office worker refused to hand it over because she was not listed in M's file as a parent or guardian. Right after my mother left the school, I received an angry text from my ex-partner saying that my mother had shouted at the office worker and that they would be calling the police. I have never once heard my mother use foul language in my entire life. I knew this was yet another false accusation, though I could not immediately figure out why he would go to the trouble of lying about something like this. The last thing I wanted was for my daughter's new school to think my family was disruptive or aggressive. So I called the school to set the record straight. I introduced myself to the person who answered the phone as M's mother. The person told me that was impossible, because M's mother worked at the school. I corrected her and offered to send over a copy of M's birth certificate to prove that I was her biological mother. And that is when my ex-partner's entire arrangement began to unravel. It turned out that my ex-partner and WS had lied to the school when they enrolled M, presenting WS as M's biological mother so that M would receive free tuition. He had then lied about my mother's behavior at the school in order to prevent me from ever calling and exposing what they had done. WS was fired immediately after I presented the school with M's birth certificate. I was deeply tired of my daughter being caught in the middle of my ex-partner and WS's dishonesty, so I finally took him to court, and we eventually agreed on an official custody order. But the problems did not stop there. Several years passed, and their behavior only seemed to get worse. WS insisted on M calling her mom just a few months after she and my ex-partner started dating. They moved in together shortly after. When M was diagnosed with a severe food allergy, WS claimed she was faking it and deliberately fed her the food she was allergic to in order to test her. WS refused to allow my daughter to bring anything from my home into their house, including a stuffed bear I had just bought M for her birthday. She lost the brand new phone I had bought M for Christmas, even though I had cleared it with my ex-partner beforehand. She told M there were insects in my home. She spoke to me harshly in front of M when I came to pick her up one afternoon because I had left some shoes at my house that M had previously forgotten there. WS and my ex-partner repeatedly refused to hand M over during my scheduled periods of custody, which meant I had to call the police and file police reports simply to see my own daughter. This last detail is more strange and petty than anything else, but WS has a habit of buying the exact same shoes I own immediately after she sees me wearing them. She always picks a different color, but the exact same brand and style. This has happened at least 6 different times that I can think of. Through all of it, I have refused to say anything negative about my ex-partner or WS in front of my daughter. Like many couples, they got married during the pandemic. My own partner and I have been together for 7 years now, and M is a joyful part of our family. Over the past several months, M had been telling me and my partner that her father and WS had been fighting a great deal. 2 months ago, I received a tearful call from M, begging me to come pick her up right away because they were fighting again. My ex-partner called me immediately afterward to ask if I could take M for the week, because he had just discovered that WS had been cheating on him. M eventually told me she had known about it for months, because WS had been openly messaging strangers on a social media application in front of her. When M told her father what she had seen, WS tried to make M believe she had been mistaken about what she witnessed. I had quietly hoped that WS was finally on her way out of our lives. Unfortunately, it was just a temporary break, and he went right back to her. My partner and I had become increasingly concerned about M. Her grades were falling, and she kept getting into trouble at school. We started developing a plan to pursue primary custody through the courts, and I got M set up with a therapist. 3 days ago, I received a text message from WS at 5 in the morning, asking me to call her. Until that morning, she had never once contacted me directly. WS told me that my ex-partner had been arrested during the night for domestic violence against her, and that I needed to come pick up my daughter as soon as possible. She also told me she had requested an order of protection against him, and that the order listed M as someone it covered as well. WS is now texting me daily, asking me to report back on my ex-partner's movements and everything he says, hoping to use that information against him in their divorce. I want so badly to ask her, do you not remember how you have treated me and my daughter for the past decade? But I do not say it, because I know what it feels like to be abused by your spouse. I remember exactly how frightening that is. I am also deeply reluctant to say or do anything that could negatively affect my daughter's situation. So I feel I have no real choice but to keep my mouth shut and allow WS to believe that I am on her side. Maybe one day I will take the opportunity to remind WS about everything she put me and my daughter through over the years. But for now, I appreciate you all letting me get this off my chest. This was a long one. Thank you for staying with me.